The media is at it again with a new list of the world's most livable cities for 2021. And as someone who has been to over 100 countries, spent time for the last decade living all over the world, I wish I could say I was shocked by the media's selection. But I'm going to share with you their number one most livable city. I'm going to share with you why it's actually predictable. And I'm going to remind you why you shouldn't pay attention to lists like this. Hi, I'm Andrew Henderson. I'm the author of this book, available on Amazon. I'm also the founder of Nomad Capitalist, where we help 7- and 8-figure entrepreneurs, sometimes even 9- and 10-figure entrepreneurs and investors legally go where you're treated best. You can learn more at nomadcapitalist.com. Now, as someone who works with successful entrepreneurs, successful investors, people who are making money, you can imagine I have a little bit of a different perspective than someone who is talking about, where do I go and get a good job? Where's the best place in the world for that? But yet every year, in fact, more than every year, I am constantly frustrated by these lists put out. This is a particular list on the world's most livable cities put out by the Economist Intelligence Unit. They're the ones who put out the Big Mac Index and other reports. I'm constantly frustrated by these because, from my perspective, these lists are far too Western-centric. Is anybody going to Belgrade, Serbia, or Tbilisi, Georgia, or Bogota, Colombia? And yes, perhaps if you are in the rank and file, perhaps the public transportation there isn't as nice. Perhaps you don't make as much money at your job to buy a nice car to avoid the public transportation. Perhaps some of the neighborhoods there are issues, although I would argue a lot of the places like Tbilisi, Belgrade, safer than probably most other places on earth. But are there some imperfections in emerging market cities? Absolutely. If you are a successful person who would be considering moving, particularly from the Western world, or even from anywhere really, to those cities, and you have some money and you have some things going on for you, are they potentially better? I think they absolutely are. And so what I don't like about these reports, and I'm going to get to the number one city in a minute here, is they make it sound like there's this blanket number one place for everyone, where the reality is these reports come out, they're largely designed for expats who work in the banking sector, who work in IT, and who want to relax with shorter working hours, lots of nice cafes serving rosés along the patio. They have good school systems as defined by I don't know who. But here's the deal. The Economist Intelligence Unit has come out and said that for 2021, the Global Livability Index, number one is Auckland, New Zealand at 96 points, I guess out of 100. Basically, all of these cities, with the exception of Zurich and Geneva, are in the Asia-Pacific region. Now, not Asia-Pacific in the way that I know Asia-Pacific, as in, hey, what would be wrong with living in Vanuatu? Not my favorite place, but hey, no taxes, people leave you alone, life just goes on, not too many restrictions. Okay, let's get a bit more serious. What's wrong with living in Kuala Lumpur? What's wrong with living in Singapore? Now, certainly Asia, and part of the methodology in this report is that Asia has been less open. Some of those places have been locked down, although I can tell you, I spent a lot of time in Kuala Lumpur. It's gone back and forth. Most of the time that I was there, it was relatively life as usual. Now, a lot of cities in Europe have fallen off the list. That's why it's Asia-Pacific dominated, because they've had very strict lockdowns, because it's been very difficult. Europe has been very tough. And so basically, Auckland was number one, followed by Osaka in Japan, and then Adelaide, Australia, Wellington, Tokyo, Perth, Zurich, Geneva, Melbourne, and Brisbane. So you've got very Australia, very New Zealand heavy, more than half the list. And then a couple other places thrown in for good measure. Now, I understand that life has been somewhat more normal there, although you've had lockdowns big time in Australia in some parts. You had a lot of things happening around the world. And so what the article says, there's actually an article, you can find this, it's from CNBC. It says the Livability Index ranks cities based on more than 30 qualitative and quantitative factors across broad categories: stability, healthcare, culture and the environment, education, and infrastructure. Here's where I take issue. First of all, quality of life for me should be, where do I want to live? And if I'm a successful person, and if I can afford to pretty much live wherever I want. I mean, Australia and New Zealand are rather expensive countries to immigrate to. Australia just raised the ticket $1 million. But okay, if you can still afford it, it's on the list. Do I want to live in a place where I'm not really getting much more, but I'm paying much more in taxes. If I'm a successful person, now I understand if you make $80,000, hey, what's 20% of that for potentially a lot of extra benefits because, you're getting things. If you have kids and there's good schools, okay, fine. But if I'm, making $5 million a year, do I want to go to Australia and give them $2.5 million of that when I could, live in Singapore and potentially structure it to where I'm paying a couple $100,000 or maybe even less? Is it worth it, right? And so on top of that, I would say, do I want to live in these places? I have a great friend who lives in Adelaide, Australia. Got a family, very, laid-back life. I get it. Do I personally want to live in Adelaide? No. Now maybe I'm the target of this report, but perhaps you aren't either. Stability, healthcare, culture and the environment, education, and infrastructure. Who determines the infrastructure, right? I live in places all around the world. I don't have a problem with infrastructure. Education, I've had more people coming to me saying, I don't like the way education is going. The stuff they're teaching my kids is out of control. Healthcare, there's great healthcare all over the world. Look at the best hospitals in the world. They're in Malaysia, they're in Singapore, they're in Turkey. There's great hospitals in Mexico, in the UAE, in Lebanon, for heaven's sakes, in India. There are great hospitals practically everywhere, depending on what you need. Stability, I don't know. Is the stability of nobody can come into my country? Is that stable? Is the stability of the government's always threatening to raise taxes? Sure, nobody's invading New Zealand. Is anybody invading Malaysia? Is anybody invading Ecuador? Stability. So, my perspective is if you are, again, a successful person, these factors are going to be different, and some of them matter less to you. You can get good health care wherever you're at. Now, I understand if you're 80, there's a difference between if you're 40. Maybe you need, to have good health care, closer, whereas if you're 40, it can be more preventative. You can go somewhere else and then come back. You live in Georgia, for example, the country of Georgia. Maybe you go next door to Turkey, or you fly down to Dubai, or go to Moscow or whatever. You get better care there than you get in Tbilisi. But in my perspective, you go all around the world. I do not see a great lack of stability. I do not see a great lack of infrastructure. Now, if what we're talking about is you walk down the sidewalks and they're perfectly paved and the grass is perfectly cut and there's flower beds, that's nice. And I'll tell you what, whenever I fly into Singapore and you get out of the beautiful Changi Airport and then you drive along the freeway and they have the beautiful flowers there, you just feel like you're in a tropical garden. It's beautiful. Now, as someone who, quite frankly, likes a little bit of excitement, likes a little bit of grit, I would much prefer to live in Kuala Lumpur, and I can get a lot more for my money. Rather than buying a $10 million apartment, I could buy a $800,000 or $1 million apartment in a similarly good location, in a similarly good quality of renovation. There may be a few consumer conveniences that I'm giving up, but I'm also getting a bit more personal freedom. I'm getting left alone a bit more. And so these are things that I would think about as someone who is an entrepreneur who has the world at my fingertips and doesn't have to rely on going somewhere and having good infrastructure for a job. Now, most people are not entrepreneurs, most people are not investors, and most people are not millionaires. But if you are those things, then I think less emphasis can be placed on these reports. Because I don't know anyone that I'm talking to, and certainly, I'm talking to people who agree with me, they're looking for my help. So there's a bit of a confirmation bias there, but I talk to very few people whose goal in life is to move to Auckland, New Zealand. In fact, I've talked to quite a number of people who went to live in Auckland, New Zealand, or did live in Auckland, New Zealand, and got fed up with it. They said, I can't take it anymore. It's so boring. I gotta get out. Osaka, okay, nice place. Zurich, Geneva, I think that's a bit old school. I think they certainly have their imperfections. You pay a lot for what I think is available in other places now. We've talked about how Swiss banks, for example, they're pricing for a world when there was no competition. And that's kind of my thoughts on this entire list. These lists and the people who put them together live in a world where there's no competition. They live in the world of the Soviet Union. They live in a world where half the world is living in abject poverty, and that world has changed. Just look at the transformation of countries like in Malaysia in the last 30 years. It's not perfect, but I can tell you what, you're going to get a lot more value. You're going to probably enjoy yourself a lot more with nicer people, and you're going to have all the things that you're looking for, more than you would have if you lived in Adelaide, Australia. So, most livable cities, here's what I would suggest. Watch our episodes. Look at all the places that I've talked about. There are livable places in Mexico City. Go to Polanco, go to Lomas, go to Santa Fe. This city everyone thinks is violent and dangerous and terrible and it's falling apart. I've had some of the best health care actual in-home care that's been incredible in Mexico City at reasonable prices. Talk about other things that are important. How about great food? How about nice people? How about just feeling good? You walk around and you just feel a certain energy that you do not feel, I promise you, in Adelaide, Australia. I don't feel a lack of stability there. I don't feel a lack of culture. In fact, I feel like the culture in places like that are incredible. Education, you have to rely on going somewhere with an international school these days. You've got homeschooling, you've got tutoring, you've got everything possible these days. And I think that what we're seeing that these indexes don't keep up with is there's so many more opportunities, not only in terms of locations, but in terms of how you can do things. You don't have to get health care on a routine basis where you live. You don't have to educate your kids in the same traditional schooling model. And that's why I think these reports are bad. I disagree. I wouldn't want to go to almost any of these places. So people ask, Andrew, how do I get the most out of Nomad Capitalist? How do I begin my Nomad Capitalist journey? The first thing people do is they start right where you're at. They watch YouTube, they listen to podcasts, they read articles at nomadcapitalist.com. We've spent years creating thousands of pieces of free content so that you can get the vibe from someone who's actually done this, from someone who's actually been in your shoes. What they'll do next, they'll get a copy of the book. You can find it on Amazon. It costs a few bucks, and while it's not going to give you all the secrets, it's going to, again, give you more of the vibe. You're going to learn a lot of the things that I've learned. You're going to learn some strategies you can employ, and you're going to get a lot further in your journey. From there, if you are the 7 or 8 figure entrepreneur investor, you can go to nomadcapitalist.com. You can click Become a Client. We're pretty busy these days, but we have availability to help a limited number of people who want to create a holistic plan, something that I think is so important. So if you want to do that, go to nomadcapitalist.com, click Become a Client, learn more about how it works and how we can help you.